Welcome to KTVB Inside the Courtroom, the lori-vallow-trial. We are happy that you are here with us. We have been taking you inside the courtroom to watch this very complex case now. We are getting ready to start week 2, so we had 1 day of opening statements, and then we went into 4 days of testimony last week. And we want to make sure that you have a full view of what's going on. But we want to also make sure that we talk about kind of what this is going to be. We've talked about the show as we've done it, but we're going to try to get really in-depth to some of the themes in this case and really try to dive in deeper into some of the topics that we know people have questions about. And so it won't necessarily be a day-by-day rehash of all of the testimony. We definitely want to make sure that folks have the context that you need to know kind of who was on the stand and what they added in terms of the testimony and what we learned from them. But we also want to be able to really talk more in depth about maybe some of the testimony that we weren't able to cover quite so much, daily. So, definitely 2 different places to get some of this coverage. So make sure that you're watching the KTVB.com feed as we're doing those updates throughout the day. Alex Duggan, Morgan Romero, both covering this throughout the day and really bringing you a lot of depth, as it's happening. But then here we want to try to, again, get a little bit deeper into that. So let's start really quickly with last week. We did have an episode last week where we talked about some of the first witnesses. Kay Woodcock, first person on the stand, right? So this is grandma of J.J. Vallo, and of course very much talked about wanting to really bring justice and very emotional in terms of missing this little boy, right? That was what she brought, kind of that emotion into the case. And then the next witness, Brandon Boudreaux. Explain who he is.
So Brandon Boudreaux is the ex-husband of Lori Vallow's niece, Melanie Boudreaux, who now has a different last name. All of them identified as LDS, so he was in the same religion as Lori, as Lori's niece, as Chad Daybell, and he was very heavily involved in Lori Vallow's life because Melanie and her were very close. He testified on Monday to the fact that Melanie really looked up to her like a mother figure, and
they would do holidays
together. They did everything together. The families, him and Charles Vallo, Lori's ex-husband, who we'll talk about more later, him and Charles Vallo were really close. Melanie and Lori very close, and what ultimately happened with Brandon and why he's even involved in this case in the first place, really, as he testified to on Monday, was that he was supposed to be killed in this. Yeah. And he was shot at outside of his home after him and Melanie were going through their separation. And he was shot at and saw a person driving a Jeep Wrangler that he believed looked like Tylee Ryan, Lori Vallow's daughter's Jeep Wrangler.
Right, because Charles bought
it
Tylee the Jeep, and it had Texas plates on it because that's where they used to live. And this shooting happened outside of his home in Arizona. So this is back in Arizona.
All in Arizona.
Right.
Most of this case, and I think it's important to set the stage too, that most of this plays out in Arizona. This is very briefly an Idaho case, but it's being tried in Idaho because the crimes were allegedly committed in Idaho with the children and Tammy Daybell. But there's many crimes prior to what played out in Idaho, including Brandon Boudreaux, including Charles Vallo, again, like we'll talk about in a second. So Brandon was one of the first attempted victims, he believes, and he thinks Alex Cox is the one who shot at him, and he was driving Tylee Ryan's Jeep Wrangler. This case, because Alex Cox ultimately died, this case has never really seen its way through. Okay. But that is what he believed and has been very open about, although he didn't say Alex Cox shot at me on the stand on Monday.
Again, back to that circumstantial evidence, talking about what he did see and what he did know, and then what he assumed based on that, and why he took that information to police and what he was able to provide them.
Right, and Brandon's case was the catalyst for all of this. Brandon's case, it's important to know, he was the reason why police got involved in the first place, started looking at Lori and Chad and her children, and it was because of Brandon's case and him talking to police in Arizona that they went to track down Lori in a different state, in Idaho, and then it all unfolded from there of looking for the missing children.
And it was initially when the police went to talk to them initially about this, kind of what's going on, like where are the children, what's happening, asking Lori to sort of piece together, is there something we need to be concerned about? Because there were talks about the welfare checks, because at some point the Woodcocks, the grandparents, also, we've learned that people had lots of questions, right? And that's when law enforcement got involved. So very interesting that we then move into law enforcement testimony about some of those first interactions with Lori Vallo.
Yeah.
Right. So Detective Ray Hermosillo is with the Rexburg Police Department, and he actually learned about all this because Arizona police came to him and was like, hey, do you know about anything with J.J. Vallo, Tylee Ryan, Brandon Boudreaux? And he was like, I have no idea what's going on. So essentially they were working together, and Hermosillo came to Lori Vallo's residence to question them about what's been going on. And he said they made contact with Chad Daybell and Alex Cox, and they were unloading something out of a pickup truck. And
let me stop you right there for just a minute. Alex Cox, just to be clear, Alex Cox is Lori Vallo's brother.
Yes.
Correct.
And has been and will be a key person and a name that you will hear in, I believe, every single one of these stories and every single one of these interactions or incidents that ultimately make up this trial.
Exactly.
That name and that person is somehow connected. So we want to make sure. So it's Chad Daybell. At this point, police don't even know his relationship to Lori. But this man, Chad Daybell, and Lori's brother, Alex Cox, who are together, that's who they see initially.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And so this is all taking place in late November. And so Hermosillo looks at Alex and said, hey, where is J.J. Vallo? We've heard that he is missing. Kay Woodcock contacted us. And he said Alex just had a blank look on his face. Like he just looked at him like he was ghost white. And he looked at Chad, and then Chad looked at him, and then they kind of made weird eye contact. And then Alex goes, well, I don't know. JJ is with his grandma. And then Hermosillo was like, well, that's weird because she was the one that contacted us.
Grandma's the one looking for him.
Exactly. Yeah. And so then Alex was like, well, I don't have Lori's phone number. And so then Hermosillo says, well, I'm pretty sure he was lying to me about that. And we probably know he was because they were very, very close. And we've observed multiple text messages between them. And then he was like, well, when's the last time you saw the kids? And then Chad Daybell goes, oh, it was October. And, I hardly know Lori. I've hardly met her. I don't know her. I've only met her a couple of times. Well, they were married 2 weeks prior to this.
Yeah.
So 2 weeks prior to telling this detective that he barely knows Lori, that he really has only talked to her or met her a couple of times, and Alex telling detectives that he doesn't know how to contact his sister, who we have lots, as you said, lots of information to say that they were incredibly close and connected and a part of each other's lives at every step along the way. So is this the first time that jurors potentially heard of what appears to be a blatant a lie? I mean, a misinformation given to law enforcement.
Is it the first time
in this testimony that we've heard it, or this trial?
That's a good question.
I would think probably the first big inconsistency.
Yeah, right.
Because and we know the children have been missing a month at this point.
Right.
And
this was November.
They had set that up. Yeah. Like they definitely set that up with Kay's testimony.
Right. Sure. I was going to say, I think Kay testifying on Monday was probably the first time we heard some inconsistencies because she testified to the fact that she's the one that called police.
Yeah. Right. But this is the first time we've heard of how Alex and Chad sort of went into into those conversations with law enforcement. And this is the first time we've heard how they were going to approach it initially. Yeah. And it was no idea. I don't know what you're talking about, and I don't even know this lady.
Exactly.
And how did he find out, or what did he say about them being married 2 weeks earlier?
So I don't think he actually knew it at this point, okay. But he did know something was going on because I remember him saying, I told my other detective, something is going on with JJ. Like there's very evasive answers, there's something going on, we are not getting cooperation from these people, period. So then because of this, and Lori's not home at this point, so because of this, they were like, we're getting a search warrant. So they get a search warrant, and this happens the next day. But I think before this, they had actually talked to Lori, and she had said, because they came back and forth. And they had talked to her, and she was like, oh, no, he's with Melanie, my friend Melanie in Arizona. And they were like, okay. And they call Melanie, and she doesn't answer, doesn't respond. So they're like, fishy, right? So they get a search warrant, come back the next day on November 27th, and she's gone. She's completely gone. She's cleaned out her closet. Everything else looks fine. Like he said, oh, there was children's toys. Like it looked like they belonged to JJ on the floor, but everything else, like her hangers in her closet, no clothes on them.
Very quickly, just to backtrack a little bit too, and to lay some of that foundation, she lived in an apartment in Rexburg, and her brother Alex Cox lived in a neighboring apartment, and her niece Melanie Boudreaux, who went by a different last name at this time, she also lived in a different apartment. They had all moved from Arizona to Rexburg because, as we'll get into more, Chad had said this is the place of refuge. This is going to be where we're going to build our new Zion together. So they had moved very recently before Tylee especially.
Right.
This was like a month and a half, and so they're coming into her apartment in Rexburg, and they also had knocked on all the other apartments and found nothing. But in her apartment, they found the Jeep that Brandon had testified to
with the Texas plate.
Yes, they found the Jeep. They just said, well, the no clothes on the hangers caught our attention, and so the jury and the audience were just looking at tons of evidence photos, and all of them were just guns and ammo and more guns and like a Halloween mask, and even Alex Cox's passport that was like intermixed in between them, and some stuff.
Camouflage suit.
Yeah,
right?
like a camouflage suit that you would wear like hunting.
And this was in Lori's apartment.
This was in her garage.
In her garage. Okay.
Yeah.
So not what you would find. I mean, most of us don't have that much, equipment or odd things all together.
Yeah. He described it like doomsday type, and then we know that they were kind of preppers in that aspect. But like just a lot of stuff that raised their
I was going to say, those are alarms, right?
Yes,
the alarm
right
bells
there.
going off here when, again, it is odd to have a parent not know where their child is, or to not have any alarm when detectives come looking for them.
Right.
That's one big red flag. Also, we know that Alex said, with grandmother, we know that's not true because grandma's looking for him. And Laura giving a completely different answer that, my son is with my friend, and friend saying, no, he's not. So, I mean, obviously at this point, we know that we know there's lots of questions, right? And detectives are not feeling good about the answers they're getting.
No, and they all got it. Everybody in Idaho got involved, and they're working with Arizona police as well. And then Hawaii police. But it was at that point, like you said, when Melanie Gibbs didn't answer her phone, that eventually we learned through a phone call that Melanie had recorded between her and Chad and Lori that she had essentially been asked to not answer the call from police and then to lie about where JJ was. And she said, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to tell them. So she ultimately told police, JJ's not with me.
But this was in December when she actually did
this was later when she came forward. But this is ultimately what we're learning through testimony, is that this whole time JJ was not with Melanie. Lori had said, she didn't answer her phone because they were seeing Frozen 2. And so that's why she's not answering her phone.
And these elaborate
stories.
And yet elaborate lies, but at this elaborate stories, but at the same time so easy to disprove.
Yeah.
I mean, it takes one phone call to really just ask. Yeah, it's
cooperation.
It's confusing because it's like, how else would this have gone if everything fell into place? I mean, if you have missing children, people will be looking for them, period.
But not their own mother, clearly, because as we talked about, as you guys probably discussed in your podcast last week, it was Kay Woodcock that raised the flag about the kids missing. It was never Lori. Lori didn't go to the media. The Woodcocks did. Lori didn't put out a reward. The Woodcocks did. And
in fact, wouldn't even answer questions, and that was what led ultimately to her initial arrest. Was because she wouldn't wouldn't answer questions, wouldn't produce the children, and wouldn't help law enforcement, wouldn't cooperate, and so
and fled.
Yeah, the exact opposite of what one would expect from a mother who now, if you thought your child was in Arizona with a friend and you learn that he's not, obviously you yourself are going to be the first one that's going to be, frantic to find out what in the world's going on. And we didn't ever see that from Lori, and still haven't.
Right.
I mean, when everyone had seen that video of Nate Eaton from East Idaho News walking up to them and being like, "Where are your kids, Lori? Where are your kids, Lori?"
Yeah.
And just, nothing.
And she had gotten married after the kids went missing. She had tried living her life, had moved to Hawaii. So these are all things that a grieving mother, circumstantial evidence, as we call it, would not do.
And had also, insurance said that there were no children, right?
Right. So exactly. So after they got married, Chad and Lori, on their insurance claims, you have to check a box basically listing out your family and all that stuff, and they checked that no minor children box, and police were like, "Oh, that's still a red flag." So
things not adding up.
Nothing adds up.
Yeah.
Right. And then we know that just based in their search of their apartment in Hawaii when they were over there, nothing they found connected to the kids at all. So they said, well, there's no proof of life. There's no proof of life that these kids were ever here. There was in Rexburg, but not here.
Right. Yeah.
And then we, kind of backtrack or fast forward, I guess, to Hermosillo talking about finding those kids.
Yes.
Right.
And how completely awful that scene was.
So this is in June. So we were talking about 2019 when they initially had this conversation, and they start trying to piece together what in the world happened. Fast forward, and again, as we told you, it is difficult not to go back and forth in this case because detectives, obviously, you don't often learn about all of the details and all the things that add up until, you learn about it in a different order. I mean, pieces start to come together, and only once you have the totality can you start to kind of really look at the timeline. So we know that we are going back and forth, but that's really the way that a lot of this information came forward,
And something else to just point out really quick, people were kind of asking some questions last week. Why is the prosecution going so out of order? It seems as though they're, going back to 2019 and then 2020 and then 2019 again with all these, types of testimony. And to be fair, I mean, the prosecution does have to have a cohesive witness list, very chronological, but things happen, flights get canceled, people have children, people get sick, and so they have to rework how they have their witness list, and sometimes it just doesn't work out, and it's confusing, but hopefully the jury can piece that together.
Right.
And as we've talked about too, one note to that is a prosecutor's job, and Andrea, you know this very, very dearly, is that they have to weave and paint a picture.
Yeah.
They're storytelling. That's what they're doing. They're trying to tell a story to the jurors so the jurors can agree with them.
It's a jigsaw puzzle.
Yes.
And it's, you have the box and you set it out, and that's really what, that's what it's going to look like in the end, or that's what you're hoping that people can see that picture.
Yeah.
But the only way to get there is to take some very specific pieces and put them in one at a time, and not until you get some of those pieces together does that full picture start to take shape. And I think not until the very end are you able to answer all of the questions, and there still may be missing pieces.
Right.
Let's be clear about
They
that.
say they were open with that.
Yeah.
They're like, there still might be stuff that you guys aren't going to know.
We also can't prove something.
Right.
You know what I mean? You're going to have to use circumstantial evidence. We may not know how. They said this in jury questionnaires and in jury selection. You may not know how one of the victims died exactly. Are you okay with that? Can you still convict somebody? But talking about one of the pieces, I mean, Alex alluded to it, the horrific, gruesome photos of the children and the manner in which they were found.
Yeah.
And we still don't know exactly how they died, but we do know the way in which they were found now. And Hermosillo testified to that. And I think we should take a listen to.
And we do. Let's give a quick disclaimer. It is absolutely gruesome testimony. This is the lead detective on this case, talking about what they found when they were able to exhume JJ's body, who buried in a pet cemetery for all intents and purposes. Tylee and JJ. Yeah.
And he was wrapped. For some back, he was wrapped in a trash bag, a black plastic with duct tape. They found out later he was bound in duct tape underneath that, and Alex was in the courtroom, and it really weighed heavily on everybody in the courtroom. You said you heard like audible gasps and people sobbing. Larry Woodcock, JJ's grandfather, just sobbing in the courtroom there. But this is talking about what led them. So they got that search warrant for June 9th, 2020 to search Chad Daybell's property. And once they got to Chad Daybell's property, they saw a patch of grass that was looking a little different, and that's really what flagged them to it.
I mean, they were like, these weeds look uneven. It looks like this piece of grass here is shorter than this piece of grass here. And honestly, like, to even notice that.
I know, it's incredible.
And then, just like some clumps of dirt here and there, and they marked it, and they said they swiped the topsoil, and instantly they smelled decomposing bodies.
And it was moist.
Like
that was the biggest flag for them too, was the fact that the soil was moist.
Yeah, it was different than
the other soil.
And that's and Hermosillo just says everyone smelled a strong odor as soon as that topsoil came off.
And he provided a lot of details about that, and having to be very cautious, because they do want to be very careful to preserve evidence as they are uncovering what they believe now is going to be human remains. And so in their mind, obviously, knowing it's going to be difficult and traumatic, but also really trying to maintain the integrity of every piece of that evidence, hoping to be able to know exactly what happened. And so he talks about once they get young JJ, who was 7 at the time, get his body back to the medical examiner's office. He talks about what they found.
They cut the seal on the body bag and unzipped the body bag, and it revealed the black plastic bag that had the duct tape. He placed that bag onto the metal table. It still had dirt on it from when we had taken it out of the ground. They took photographs did whatever they need to do, and they cut down the center of the black plastic bag.
Okay. When they cut down that plastic bag, what did you observe?
I saw a little boy in red pajamas. He had a white plastic bag around his head, several layers of duct tape from his chin to his forehead area. His arms were duct tape with several layers of duct tape. His arms were folded like this across his chest. You guys see that? His feet were also duct taped and bound. He had a white and blue child's blanket placed on top of him.
Very difficult to listen to those words from that detective explaining finding a little boy still in his pajamas, a child's blanket still on top of him, and yet bound, covered, head in a plastic bag, meaning someone did this to him.
Yeah, and I honestly, just to point out, like, we can hear what Hermosillo is saying, but we can't see the courtroom and their reaction. And I think that everybody in that courtroom, like, there wasn't a dry eye. There was just, like, people were in shock. Because, I mean, they're showing these on the screen. They're showing JJ's body. They're showing every step of them pulling apart the duct tape. And one juror was crying. And I think the other jurors just looked like unable to really process what was going on. And honestly, as a lot of us were, I feel like. And I think it's also important to note that Lori was not looking at the photos.
Right.
She had her head, like, her head was slumped down. She had her hand under her chin. She wasn't looking at the photos. And it's also interesting that JJ had a children's blanket draped over his legs, because that's something that, in kind of a perverted, weird way, that I've heard people who kill children do, in a way, like, to say I'm sorry and I love you, but in
Almost like an act of nurturing or
like
care.
a nurturing act, but not at all, because obviously he was murdered. But it's just some kind of weird thing to do, like putting his blanket over him, and honestly, like, him being in red pajamas, it's just awful. And we know that, he was last seen on September 22nd, and there was a photo taken of him on September 22nd wearing those red pajamas.
And he was in Alex's arms.
Yeah, and so
A friend
Right.
reported
so it's
saying
like we
that.
know that was the day he died, and the last
Perhaps,
time he was seen.
yeah,
maybe.
Yeah. I think also what really rocked people was hearing how Tylee died, or hearing the manner in which she was found, and how she was burned.
Yeah.
I mean, not to be gruesome, but
It's gruesome.
It
I
is
mean, that
gruesome.
it is a gruesome
you
case.
can't, and this is the problem, right? You can't hide this from jurors. They need to
Right.
know everything. And the attorneys and Hermosillo really having to get that point across, and how inhumane it was that she was found as just like mounds of flesh.
Right. I think that's what he called her.
Tissue and bone.
He said, I'm so sorry to describe it this way, globs of flesh.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry. He kept apologizing for how he was talking about it. But yeah, to be frank, it wasn't a person that you were looking at on those photos. It was just pieces.
Right.
So
A 16-year-old girl, though. Right. I mean,
yeah. I mean, like, I can't even. And also, the jury we all had to see JJ's face once they took the duct tape off. And I'm not going to get into detail of that either, but that's traumatic for a lot of people.
Absolutely.
And it's awful.
Yeah.
And there were people that cried. There were people, I mean, Larry just, crying in his head. Like, how can you process that? You can't.
Right.
And these jurors can't even talk about it. I mean, how badly would you want to go home and talk about that with your spouse?
That's a whole other conversation that we talked about with Gene Fisher, remember, about the mental health of the jurors and the things that they were going to see. That we're hearing these things for the first time, too, as journalists.
Yes. And there's absolutely nothing normal about any of that, right?
Yeah.
And so all of those responses There's this an absolutely abnormal experience for everyone that's a part of that. And so all of those responses being very normal, but as you said, not even sure they're processing, and yet they have to, because they have to take in this information and weigh it. And they have to consider it and kind of piece it together as they start to put that puzzle together, which is what jurors have to do in their minds. You talked about the kind of the response from Lori. She had asked to be excused and excluded from trial. What was the argument there?
Well, the defense was like, hey, given her mental health, because she was found incompetent a while ago, given her mental health and the nature of the evidence that she is looking at right now, she should not be able to have to see that. And the judge was like, hey, actually, in order to ensure a fair trial for her, she has to be here. And, the prosecution said there's no right that a defendant has to not be here, but there is a right the defendant has to be here. Yes. So kind of weighing that in a certain way, they made her stay.
But it wasn't without a lot of delay in the courtroom in a very interesting scenario that we've personally never seen play out, of them leaving for lunch and everybody leaving for lunch, and then the defense coming back and then going back out, and the prosecution being there, and then the defense calling the prosecution and the judge to come out in the hallway with Lori as well.
I've never seen, I've
covered several criminal cases, and I've never seen anything like that. And it delayed the hearing a total of probably an hour, but I think everybody, like you said, everybody in the courtroom we were like,
questioning. Is this a plea deal? We had no idea what was going on.
And I spoke with David Leroy, criminal defense attorney, the former AG of Idaho and lieutenant governor, and he said, because this was a lot of speculation on social media, is this something that the defense is trying to do to make her look sympathetic and to have people kind of think of her as that mother figure that the defense is trying to make her out to be? And David Leroy said, absolutely not. He said these are very skilled public defenders, criminal defense attorneys that are not going to play games. Yeah. So he believed, at least in my interview with Dave, he believed what she was expressing was a very natural, normal reaction to seeing something so horrific. And so, as Alex said, she didn't look at the screen the rest of the day. She was like this, or she just refused to look up and react in any way.
And we watched, we heard comments, we read folks saying, like that she should not get to not be there. And that's essentially what the judge said as well, because what you don't want to do is, as you said, you do have a right to be there. And what you don't want to have happen is that
a mistrial.
Exactly.
In the future, because you're not there. You don't know.
And the defense could always pull it on the judge of like, oh, you mishandled this situation poorly. And Judge Stephen Boyce, props to him. He is
thorough.
His courtroom is dialed. As a journalist, as a TV journalist, I am frustrated that we don't have cameras in that courtroom. But I understand, because as we've discussed throughout this case, it could be a circus. It already is outside the courthouse. There's national media, there's bloggers, there's podcast hosts, there's local media, there's media from Utah and Arizona. And so if you have cameras inside a courtroom, it can really make something a little bit sensationalized in a way and create an even bigger media circus.
And I said the same thing. I said, much respect to him. You understand where it comes from. Yeah. Can it be frustrating? Do we wish we had access? Do we know that you wish you had access? Absolutely. But as you said, he's been very, very cautious and even controlling some of the dynamics inside the courtroom.
Typing, keyboards. even standing up with your laptop open, as I do every time, because I'm working. That's not allowed anymore. Just so
making
dialed
faces. He actually on Friday when I was finally in the main courtroom for the first time and Alex was there, he had the bailiff say, we cannot have anybody reacting because we don't want to sway the jury. If you make a face, you gasp, you whisper, the jury could hear that and they could be influenced.
Sure.
So don't distract anybody. And that's hard too, right? Because we're human.
Some of the stuff that you hear during this, you want to gasp, you want to go, you want to make a face, and you just have to dial it up. You can't do it.
So on the same day that they are they've served the search warrant on Chad Daybell's property, they are finding these bodies. We know that Chad and Lori spoke. What do we know about that conversation? Where were they? How do we know about that?
Well, Lori was in jail.
Lori was in jail. She'd already been arrested. And the basis of the arrest for Lori was
she didn't produce her kids.
She didn't produce her kids, and she had by January of 2020 to produce her kids. And fast forward, this is June of 2020. So Chad is in his truck as
Hermosillo said.
According to Hermosillo, as detectives and the FBI are digging up his backyard, and he gets a phone call from the Madison County Jail, and it's from Lori Vallo. Should we listen?
Yeah.
Okay. We'll listen.
They call from an 845 Lori, an inmate at Madison County Jail. Hi, babe.
Hello?
Are you okay?
No, they're searching the property.
The house right now?
Yeah. My name is Mark Means. Will be talking to you.
Okay. What, are they in the house?
No, they're out in the property.
Are they seizing stuff? Again?
They're searching. There's a search warrant, and so we're going to extend this case logical. So we'll see what transpires.
So not a lot of detail there, but clearly some tension just in what are they doing? What's going on? What are they saying? What are they finding?
And she knows her call is being recorded. And there was a captain from the jail that testified to the fact that he goes through every call, and he had the prosecution had submitted this to evidence as well as a video visit between her and her sister. And at the end of that, I don't think we heard it, but she's asking him, "What do you want me to do? Pray?" And he says, "Yeah, pray." And then she says, "What can I do for you?" And, he's just like, "Nothing really. I'm glad you called." And then they end the call with, "I love you." And that was a call that we knew existed and we'd heard. And I think having the jury hear that, of them having that conversation, then immediately after that, Chad goes, his daughter lived kitty corner, and he's at his daughter's house, correct? And then he
leaves at a high rate of speed
speeds off. When he saw some stuff going on in his yard. So
and then they caught him, obviously.
They caught him. They arrested
him. Yeah. But I mean, just like a whole just spiral, because we even like you said, backtracking again, Chad. The whole argument here is that Chad influenced Lori, and then Lori, asked Alex to do these things, and Alex was her protector, and so now backtracking back to Charles, this whole thing kind of also spiraled because of how Charles and Lori's relationship completely came to a head and dwindled. And Lori told everyone that Charles was cheating, and then Charles, and we know that she was seeing Chad Daybell, right. and then the police got involved with this because Alex had shot Charles in self-defense, and then it was just this, there's so many little pieces.
Right. So much. It's so complex.
And interesting, just because, again, the complexity and the having to go all the way back. I mean, you hear that Charles Vallo is, they're in a fight. Alex claims self-defense, shoots Charles. We find out that years earlier, Alex's first wife, now says that initially, he talked about doing that kind of thing to other people. Talked about, I want to incite a fight and then kill them in self-defense. And so whether we'll hear that in a trial or not, that
because
information,
he's not on trial,
exactly,
which is tough, yeah.
That information is out there, though, and you start to hear all of this and start to realize, wow, does the pattern really go that deep? Are we talking about years and years potentially of this
building
complicated relationship of Alex, you said, protecting his sister, and something that people talked about. I think several people have talked about that dynamic of really, him feeling like he needed to step in.
And being told through Chad that he was her savior, and he was sent to this earth to be her protector, which we'll talk about in a subsequent podcast. But by the way, Charles was killed in July of 2019. So this is a few months before the children are last seen, before the children are allegedly murdered. And this is about a year until they find the children's bodies. So Lori had started, it is all based, this case, we talk about themes, this case is so rooted in religion and religious fanaticism and religious extremism, and taking the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and scripture from the Book of Mormon and the Doctrines and Covenants, and twisting that to sort of be the basis in which they fuel their actions, right? But we'll get into that in a different podcast. But I think the Charles thing, we talked about Brandon Boudreaux being the catalyst, but a lot of local media in Arizona really got involved in this case because of Charles's death and how bizarre that was.
It was just suspicious. Because you had somebody. So like dissecting even the 911 call or like the
amount of blood.
Yeah, so the Arizona police officer that gets on the stand, and just to note, they are allowing this testimony from Charles's case in Arizona in this case to only show motive. This is not to be used as evidence for the children dying or Tammy's death or anything like that. It's just motive, which is really rare. Really rare.
But it goes back to the prosecution's opening statements of like this is a pattern of behavior.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then, we have Detective Nathan Duncan with Gilbert PD on the stand, and he did some legwork with like cell phone data and text messages and emails and all this stuff. And essentially, he was the first responder on that scene. So Alex said, I did CPR, and I shot him self-defense because we were in an argument, and we know that Lori and Tylee, were in the house. JJ was in the car. They both left when this happened. And basically he gets in there and he goes, hey, I am not seeing a lot of blood here.
Right.
Which is weird. And the prosecution says, hey, why is that weird? And he goes, well, based on my experience, if you're doing CPR on someone with a gunshot wound, naturally CPR pumps your heart, right? It's like manually. It starts getting
so
it going
that
again.
blood flow.
Yeah, so it increases the blood flow, and then that blood will start seeping out of your wound. Well, he said I did not see any blood, which is super weird to him. And so he was like, I don't know if Alex did CPR or not.
Again, it didn't add up to him. He has alarm bells going off
Alex
and says
didn't have many wounds appearing to have gotten
defensive
in
wounds,
defensive wounds appearing to have gotten in a big scuffle in which was reported to law enforcement. But I think the background of Charles and Lori's relationship is also interesting.
It is,
of what led up to this, and we could have a full podcast about this, but Detective Duncan talked a lot about in producing those text messages and those emails of Charles finding out that Lori was having an affair with Chad because he went through emails. So him and Lori had actually separated for a period of time. And when he died, he was living in Texas and she had moved back to Arizona and had gone to Texas with him after they had separated, tried to work things out, and then she went back. And he had rented them a house in Arizona. So he was visiting, wanted to see JJ, take JJ to school. And that's why he was there. He wasn't living at this house at the time that this happened.
Right.
And he, through text messages that Detective Duncan testified to, he had a feeling something was up. He was texting with her other brother, Adam. So she has Alex and Adam. And Adam is not in this kind of circle. He is very much like, what is going on?
And he liked Charles.
He liked Charles. And Lori tried to create this divide between Charles and the rest of the family and cast him, like she said, as crazy and having an affair. And so he's texting with Adam and he's saying, they're both like, something's up. Something's not right. Alex is here. Something is up. And Alex had spent the night before. He didn't live with them.
Right.
Adam says
But again,
they're
there he
planning
is.
something.
Yeah.
And Charles said absolutely. And then that was the last text he sent. And then boom, he was dead.
And he had talked and shared with law enforcement just that there was something not right.
Oh, yeah. There had
right?
been stuff leading up to this. Body camera footage that we have.
It's sad because I don't think anyone believed him.
I was going to say, he definitely spoke up and said there's
Yes.
something not right, and he didn't feel safe.
And as people have testified to, and as we've seen in body camera footage and in the interviews that Lori-Vallow and even Tylee Ryan, when she came in with her mom, did with law enforcement, Lori's very convincing. And we've seen multiple people testify to this. She was charismatic. She had this beautiful smile, according to the defense. She had a way of sort of talking her way out of things, it appeared, throughout this process. And so
very convincing.
That is what's sad, like you said, of raising concerns and not feeling heard.
And potentially another pattern in that her second husband, so Tylee's dad, allegations of abuse, allegations of misconduct. We don't know. He's not alive anymore, and we don't know what happened. But again, potentially, circumstantially, a pattern of they're a problem. There's this person that's a problem. We have to get rid of him, or I need to be protected from this person who is a danger to me, and then Alex there to protect.
Yeah, I mean, and Charles even, I feel like he caught on to this. He was like, he in text messages that Duncan was shown, he wrote, this keeps killing me. Maybe your goal is to kill me.
He literally said that.
There is something really, really wrong with you. Lying has become second nature to you. He seems really angry, and then he kind of backtracks and he's like, I want to work on things. Please tell me why. You've destroyed me. Please. We have a son to raise. I've been entirely faithful to you. It's just really sad. And we know Charles's family was there too. And
Lori-Vallow has been spiritual. She has been a religious person, but it was over this between 2018 and 2019 when she met Chad Daybell that things really progressed and that she got very extreme. And the reason that we learned that Charles died is because, well, there's probably other motivations as well, but what was testified to on the stand was that she believed, and Chad believed, that he was a zombie, that he had been possessed by 3 different spirits in the last year of his life, every more powerful than the other. And finally, this last spirit, Hiplos, they couldn't cast out, which is something that they did with people that they believed were dark and possessed. And they couldn't cast this spirit out. And the only way to fully get rid of this demon was to kill the person and set it free. So that was discussed, as well as she's being charged with grand theft, in this case with her children and with Tammy Daybell, Chad Daybell's wife.
And she's been indicted
in Arizona for Charles's death. But a lot of this also is rooted in money. And Detective Duncan showed text messages of her talking about his life insurance policy and how she thought she was going to be the beneficiary. But because they had separated, Kay Woodcock testified to the fact that he actually made Kay, his sister, the beneficiary. So there's other, like I said, there's other motivations. Yeah. There's religion. There's also money.
And we'll hear that. I mean, we hear that she tried to, there were phone calls where she tried to thinking that she was going to be the beneficiary and trying to figure that out. And the one person we haven't talked about at all today is Tammy Daybell. Yeah. And that is, I mean, absolutely another person in this case, another victim potentially of these 2 people who, this is Chad Daybell's late wife, Tammy. And we know that they have now since ruled her death homicide.
Asphyxiation.
Yeah.
By asphyxiation.
And so that's one more. I know that Tammy has not yet gotten a lot of the attention in this trial. Really a lot of focus on JJ and Tylee, but just don't want to miss explaining that is another person who we believe the prosecution's going to say another victim of this couple.
Right. And we heard from a sheriff's deputy about this as well. He was the one that was really overseeing Tammy's case, and originally it had been reported that she had died from natural causes. And then as all of this was unfolding with the missing children and Rexburg and Arizona police and the Fremont County Sheriff's Office looking into Lori and Chad, they thought we should exhume Tammy's body. So they dug up Tammy's body and they ran autopsy results, and then we learned for the first time publicly, at least on record by law enforcement, that she had died by asphyxiation. So Lori is not being charged with her murder specifically, but is being charged with conspiracy to commit murder and grand theft related to her case. Versus with her children, she's actually being charged with first-degree murder. But with Tammy, circumstantial evidence, Chad had married Lori just weeks later,
and told people that she had a ton of health problems, where the detective said she had no health problems.
Right. Yeah.
So.
And a bit of a rush to kind of, like, when she died, I think they felt like there was a rush sort of to let's hurry the process along.
Yes.
Let's get her buried, and let's,
And friends testified to the fact that she had no health issues, and the detectives even said she had no health issues.
Yeah. And I'm sure we'll learn more as this goes on about Tammy specifically. I mean, they still have tons of time to build that case, but yeah, I mean, and in the next podcast we'll talk more about the religious aspect to this, but that's kind of the groundwork that we're laying right now. But I mean,
and that's exactly what we're going to get into next, because there were at least two other witnesses that we would definitely want to talk about, and that's when we start to really understand some of the depth of this, I guess, this theme of faith, and as you said earlier, Morgan, it's that idea of validation or justification, and we're going to talk to folks who are a part of the LDS religion, Church of Latter-day Saints, and say that's not how these procedures and these different ideas that we hold so dear to us in this faith, that's not how they are to be used. And so we're going to kind of dig into that in our next episode of Inside the Courtroom. Of course, please continue to follow us here, and continue to follow us on KTVB.com, Twitter. We appreciate your updates each day on this trial. I know it is a very, very difficult case to follow, but we appreciate the insight that you're bringing us, and we're glad to have you here with us, and we will see you very soon.